Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Chapter 10, talking about origins. We are specifically talking about the history of where these origin beliefs came from. We have gone through the history, starting with the beliefs back with Aristotle in ancient Greece, and we have gone through to Darwin and Wallace. At this point, we are going to talk about the beginning of the ideas that are now referred to as neo-Darwinism. In other words, the ideas of Darwin applied with modern technology and ideas. The ideas related to genetics, molecular biology, and things that didn't necessarily exist when Darwin made his ideas. Before talking about all of the different things related to the new ideas, we need to have a basic idea about what the core beliefs of what is referred to as macroevolution, in other words, changing from one species into many species, what that core actually is believed. Okay, first off, it is believed that it's related to genetics, to the DNA, a physical source, that it isn't just something that happened someday, that there has to be a physical issue. The idea also would be that natural selection is the main cause of one species becoming a different species. Natural selection, remember, is the idea that the fittest or the best adapted survive and pass on their genes. The other belief is that evolution is caused by changes over long periods of time. If you're not aware of it, most evolutionists will say the world is millions, if not billions of years old, and you have everything down to people believing that the Earth is thousands of years old, usually between 6,000 and 10,000 years. So there is a wide variety of what people believe. Macroevolutionists, those that believe you have these changes over time, want to have that time. So their theory incorporates, like I said, millions to billions of years. It may not seem like modern ideas. However, you had, in the year 1900, you had Hugo de Vries, who came up with the mutation theory of evolution. By this point in time, genetics had been discovered, and Hugo de Vries added the idea that mutations are actually what would cause these changes that would be a good thing to have happen, and that basically that would be a form of natural selection. So that if you had a mutation, something happened, that would give you an advantage, and therefore you would be the perfect one to continue on and evolve the species. He specifically referred to this as the mutation selection theory. However, if you've paid attention at all through the series of genetics, you know that at best, mutations generally cause nothing to happen. Pretty much always, anytime you have had a mutation, you have issues where something bad happens. And also, in order for this to be passed on through history, it would have to be able to be passed on to the next generation and to increase in frequency. So, although this is highly believed, I don't see how you can study mutations in genetics and come up with the idea that a mutation is going to lead to something good. Okay. Now, lots of times in history, people have said, well, I don't see evolution happening. You know, you don't see a new species just pop up. Some evolutionists in 1972 by the name of Niles Eldredge and Stephen Gould came up with an idea as a way to explain that. The belief before this time was that evolution was a gradual, slow change, and that you had small changes that happened and they just built up over time. They came up with the idea of punctuated equilibrium. Punctuated, like you think of punctuation marks, they're at specific points. Okay? Their idea was that for a long time, there will not be change of any kind in a species. And then all of the sudden, there's going to be a sudden change, not these small gradual changes. They would say either due to mutation or something that had happened in the environment or something caused this sudden dramatic change. And that the reason we don't see evolution is because the reality is most of the time it's not happening. And they would also use that to explain the reason you don't see these so-called missing links, the ones that are in between stages between these species as they're supposed to be changing. Their idea caught on because it solves a lot of problems that evolution would have in explaining a lot of things about why you don't see evolution, why you don't have these missing links that are somewhere in between. Another way that evolution is studied is by what's called comparative anatomy. And that's where you simply look at how the bodies of different living things are and you compare them, the different structures that a body has. Now, first off, they have what would be called homologous structures. Homo, remember, means same, logos, written, like homologous chromosomes, so that they would basically be the same thing. So what you see is a picture of the front limb, you know, the arm, leg, whatever, wing, of these different animals. And you can see everything from a person to a bat to a bird to a seal. It's not like they're all in the same group even. And you would compare and say, well, you could see that these parts are the same, these parts are the same, and so on. You can see the different colors. And they would say that because those structures are very, very similar, that they must have somehow come into being from a common ancestor. So that's how they come up with that idea. Now they also have what are referred to as analogous structures. And this is supposed to be where you have a similar function, but you have them arrive at that function very differently. So in this case, they would say, for example, the bat, the butterfly, and the bird all needed to do the same thing. They all needed to fly, but they evolved from different ancestors because bats are mammals, butterflies are insects, and birds are obviously birds. And the structure of how they fly is very different. However, if you paid attention to the last slide, you would notice that the bat wing and the bird wing are actually found on the list for homologous structures as well. So there is some confusion as to whether they would qualify as evolving in the same way from the same structure, or as to whether they have different ancestors and actually just evolved the same function but in a different way. So there really isn't even a consistency within the group of evolutionists themselves as to what evolved from what. Now, something that is given as evidence that of course we must have evolved are what are known as vestigial organs. And these are organs that are not known to have a function. And an evolutionist has stated many times that they are the organs that were previously used by other organisms, so that things that would not be used on us, such as the coccyx, the tailbone, goosebumps, raising our hair, or a flightless bird having wings like the ostrich, that these are all things that used to work in a previous ancestor, but now they don't, and they have no function. The appendix was on this list, along with a lot of other different things. At one point, the vestigial structure list for humans was probably a couple hundred different things. The problem being is almost everything on the list, including your appendix, has been shown to have a function. By the way, your appendix is part of your immune system. So although they are saying they have no function or no known function, they had to have been used by something else. Oftentimes the scenario just is the organ has not known what it does yet. And oftentimes it has a very different function than what they say it evolved from. Your appendix was thought to have evolved from like the multiple stomachs like a cow, and that we didn't need it anymore because we were not herbivores anymore. So they said it would have been like an extra stomach that just shrank over time. But like I said, your appendix is actually part of your immune system and filters out bacteria. So there are a lot of things that they just say have no function. Now, through history, excuse me, through history, one of the techniques that's been used, and you still will see it used, is embryology. Embryology is where you're studying the embryo before it is born, and it is part of comparative anatomy, and you're looking at the different structures. In this picture, as is often the case, they study an amphibian, bird, and in this case a monkey and a human, and they look at the similarities between them. And you can see, yes, there are lots of similarities. They all start out as a fertilized egg. We all have cell division, which is what the cleavage is. And then you can see in the body segments that they compare what are referred to as gill slits. The gill slits are these slits on the side of the head that appear to be the same in humans and birds and fish, amphibians, all these different things, where they assumed in humans and birds that these gill slits used to come from a common ancestor with fish, and that they were somehow related to breathing in water, which led to the idea of a common ancestor in the far distant past that came from water. The problem being is these so-called gill slits, even though they look similar and have often been referred to as the same thing, have radically different functions in what they end up becoming. In a fish, yes, the gill slits do become gills. However, in a lot of animals, the gill slits actually start forming parts of the face. And the lower part of your head. The gill slits, for example, will end up becoming things like your mouth, your chin, your neck. So they would say they completely disregard it. In fact, a lot of evolutionists will no longer use the idea of embryology because they've realized that it's ridiculous. And then they'll even go and say, okay, we all have these limbs, arms and legs and things that are so similar. Well, that's because they all have limbs. And yes, those limbs do change and develop differently. And of course, you are seeing the pictures all shown at the same size. There is a significant difference between the size of a chick and the size of a human or a monkey when they are born. So like I said, lots of evolutionists have even tossed the idea of embryology as a way to compare for previous ancestors. But a lot of the ideas based on it are still held, just without any support. Another method as to compare individuals and say how closely related they are evolutionarily is to look at how similar they are genetically. Now, this is where you get the comparison between humans and apes, and you can see that humans and apes have about a 96% comparison. That about 96% of the DNA is the same. However, humans and the primates are not really all that similar except in appearance. What you actually will find out is that humans, chemically speaking, are more related to pigs. And that is why humans and pigs are able to pass diseases back and forth so easily. And you can see that you actually are very closely related to a cat, according to evolution, where 90% of your DNA would be the same. In comparison, you and I and everybody else, all us human types, only have about a 0.1% difference in our DNA. That 0.1% makes up all the differences that you see from person to person. All the rest of the DNA that we have is identical. Okay? So the idea of genetic similarities being a cause for a common ancestor really doesn't have that much credibility. The last thing that is used that we're going to talk about for genetic similarities, or not genetic similarities, but evolutionary evidence, is fossils. And lots of times they'll say you can see all these massive changes that have gone down through time. But I would guess if you're looking at the images in these fossils, you are going to see that you pretty well can identify all of them. You have a frond of some sort of palm, a fish, a spider, and a type of octopus. Also, lots of times, these fossils that have been told were extinct for millions and millions of years will suddenly appear on somebody's camera and they'll go, oops, guess it wasn't extinct. One of those that makes a marvelous example is a fish called a coelacanth, which is spelled Coelcanth, I think. And it was basically a fish that was extinct for millions and millions of years, except for all the ones people were fishing for. We will talk again next time. I hope that I figure out how to deal with the sound issues. And no, I don't have anything wrong. I'm just getting a sore voice from trying to do all these videos and not having breaks in between. So don't worry about the cough. It's just a dry throat from doing all these videos. I love you all, and I miss you all.